says, "And when they had called in the apostles, they beat them and charged them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. Then they left the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer dishonor for the name. And every day in the temple and from house to house they did not cease teaching and preaching that the Christ is Jesus." So they call the apostles back into the room after Gamaliel's advice had been accepted. You'd have to imagine they didn't know if death was on the table. It could have been. And so the Sanhedrin do amp up their response. Remember last time they just let them go. Said, "Hey guys, don't you do that anymore." They wagged their finger and they left. This time they are physically beaten. So it's one step further. Something more is happening. Now, if this is the Jewish traditional beating, it could have been the 39 lashes, or what they call the 40 less 1. So if it was that, and I think it probably was, they would have made the men kneel, remove their shirts, and stick their chest out and put their hands behind their back, and would whip them with thick leather straps alternating between the chest and the back. 39 times. Now, this was not a light punishment. Very painful. You would be bruised for days and weeks. And so, all the apostles, they take their turn being beaten one by one in front of the Sanhedrin. And then we're told they limped home in sadness with their tail between their legs and reconsidered their calling. Right? No? Oh, wrong verse. They felt sorry for themselves and said, "I didn't know Christianity was going to cost me anything. I thought this would make me cool in front of my friends." Right? Wrong verse again? Oh, wow. What did they say? Verse 41. "Then they left the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer dishonor for the name." That's different. Worthy to suffer dishonor for the name. Such a mind-changing way to think about suffering, isn't it? They're beaten. And as they leave, they are rejoicing. Now, my imagination has them skipping and singing with bruises on their chests and backs and high-fiving each other. I don't know if that's how it happened, but this did not deter them at all. In fact, it emboldened them. Why? Because they saw this pain as extremely significant. It connected them back to Jesus. They saw it as a privilege to be counted worthy to suffer on Jesus' behalf. You see, they remember, they were there. They remember the shame Jesus took for them. Jesus was brought before this council. Jesus was flogged and beaten, only worse. Jesus was stripped and dishonored with the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Jesus was spit upon and had his beard ripped out, and people blasphemed him to his face. Jesus was made to carry his own cross up the hill as he stumbled under its weight, and Jesus was hung on a cross as Romans rolled dice for his clothes. So for them, it was an honor to be counted worthy to suffer for Jesus because Jesus suffered so much for them. The apostles were in the mix. They were in the fight. They were doing what they were supposed to be doing, what Jesus had asked them to do. The pain and shame that they received from this moment was not a signal for them to stop. Not a signal for them to change course. Not a time to rethink their calling. It was a confirmation that they were within the will of God to receive the shame and the pain. And in case you're here thinking, man, this sounds different than what I've heard. I don't know if this is biblical. Let me tell you something. Jesus said to them, in this world, you will have tribulation. Jesus said, you will be hated by all for my name's sake. Jesus said, if this world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said, when people hate you and exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil on account of the Son of Man, rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for your reward is great in heaven. They were just doing what Jesus told them to do. They were experiencing what Jesus said would happen if you follow Jesus. Paul said in Galatians 6:17, I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. What did Paul mean? What are the marks of Jesus? They were the scars left from being persecuted, beaten, and stoned for preaching the gospel. Paul didn't have to get a Christian tattoo or wear a cross as jewelry to display his allegiance. He bore the literal scars of standing for Jesus on his body, and it was not a shame to him. It was an honor to him. I think we have a crisis of honor in our culture today as people have deconstructed their faith, their values, and have separated from our historical roots and live in the ever-evolving present. I think people don't know what honor even is anymore. In America, we're not ashamed about things we should be ashamed about, and we don't know what honor is or how to get it, and maybe that's why everyone is dejected and says their lives have no meaning. When these apostles felt the blow of the rod or the strap across their back because of Jesus, even though it hurt, and they probably yelled, and they probably had tears welling up in their eyes, they had a sense of fulfillment about their life because they stood for something when the heat was on. They were right in the center of God's will, and they knew it. They could feel it, even as the bruises were piling up. What was intended to make them feel shameful actually made them feel honor because they were counted worthy to suffer like Jesus did. Listen, Jesus did not spare them the pain, but he did spare them the shame. If you view pain for Jesus as a matter of rejoicing, your enemies will have no power over you. And in that, you will persevere with joy and peace. And after all this, now we get back to the theme verse. Verse 42, it says, "And every day in the temple and from house to house, they did not cease teaching and preaching that the Christ is Jesus." After all this, they didn't stop. They continued onward. They continued meeting in the temple. They continued their evangelism. They continued after being arrested. They continued after the intimidation. They continued after escaping death. They continued after being beaten. And not only did they continue, they rejoiced in their sufferings. It may not be pretty. It may not be pain-free. It may involve being made fun of publicly and privately. It may involve being called names you never thought anybody would call you. It may involve being outcast from the cool kids' table. It may involve jail time. It may involve being debanked or having your accounts frozen someday. But remember, it is a joy to suffer dishonor for the name of Jesus. When you believe this deep in your soul, like the apostles did, you will keep going and going and going. Pray with me.